Hey guys, welcome back to the Darth Kilhoun channel. This is your host, Darth Kilhoun. As we wrap up our book review of the Horus Heresy novel, False Gods, this is the 5th video and the overview of the entire book. I'm not going to get too heavily into the plot as I discussed it in the other parts, links in the description, but I will be covering my opinions on the matter, as I have always been a fan of the science fantasy genre, and I love this huge and creative environment generated by the creative minds of these authors and studios like George Lucas, and creating these massive George Lucas and the creators behind the 40K community, creating these galaxies of that captures the hearts of tens of millions. Like 40K is just this huge swath of ultimate creativity into a universe of the grim dark of the far future. It's more of the adult grown-up version of Star Wars in my mind. And then I also have a place in my heart for Star Wars, as it was my first true experience into the science fantasy genre. And this novel is just one piece in a massive tapestry in the series of why the Imperium of the 41st millennium became what it became from the 31st millennium. And this book is kind of like the first steps towards the grimdark of the 41st millennia within the 31st millennia. And you see the tensions between characters, the struggles between the old statocracy of the Astartes legions and the new civil oligarchical council of the Council of Terra, which would eventually become the Hive Lords of Terra in the 41st millennia, and the simple difference between the soldier and the civilian classes with the Astartes versus the Rembrandters, a conflict as old as time. I think the author Graham McNeill handled this very well, as you see this boil out into outright conflict and resolution in the beginning of a revolution, aspects mirrored in our own world, with the rise of many frustrated groups that circle around a figure like Horus, seen in men like Adolf Hitler, Mao Zedong, Vladimir Lenin, all responsible for mass atrocities out for the call of change. And I feel that I know that Horus is going to mirror many of these archetypes of men. The plot. The plot in this novel is very much one of character decline and character conflict. The entirety of the plot centers around Horus and the men around him, pulling him in a tug-of-war over the second most powerful man of the Imperium's soul. On one side you see Erebus, the double-tongued snake that slithers his way into the circle of trust of the War Master and officers of the Sons of Horus. Erebus using his way with words to lay a trap for Horus. Once this is sprung, he goes into the grief-stricken Mournival, while the logical Loken and headstrong Torgaden were away, using his sway over to get Horus into a position necessary for his downfall. And when Torgaden confronts him, he holds a knife to his throat before all of his brothers in the Warrior Lodge, but his brothers side with Erebus over Torgaden, showing the mistrust between the Legionnaires and how this war has just divided them. It is a good way of showing human psychology through a fictional means, and is very telling of the struggles over a man's soul. But then on the other side, you see Loken, which is arguably the main point of view character and the overall most inquisitive character of this novel, and is the most insightful member of the Mournival, who is genuinely concerned with the health of his unit as he sees it slipping away because of actions of an outsider, aka Erebus. At first attempts to just go around his grief-stricken brothers, trying to find rational solutions in line with the Imperium's doctrines and keeping a level head, but fails to console his master in time. Failure is one key component in this book. It is a constant failure to try to save Horus and to keep the decline of his unit manageable. And this is why I honestly love Loken as a character. I hope to see his growth in the next book and see what he does, because I believe the next book is, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but it covers the events of the Dropside Massacre and the eventual secession of many of the Astartes legions. And then Horus Lupercal, the War Master of the Imperium, and in this book he becomes the champion of the Dark Gods, a path he didn't need to take but ultimately chose because of a central theme of this work, and a central theme of many other works from the past, which is hubris. Horus embraces hubrism, being very hubris in his actions. Horus believes in his abilities and his skill. He led his armies over a century in the Emperor's name, winning victory after victory, proving to himself that he was the greatest of all of his brother Primarchs. It gave him this superiority complex over everyone else, knowing that he was right, but he still kept an advisory council because he valued some people's voices, but very rarely did he actually take any of them to heed. In fact, he's confronted several times by Loken in this book over it. And just because he's way too overly confident in his abilities. And along the beginning of the book, this attitude is called into question by some other characters, especially Loken. Torgadon kind of talks to Loken about it. But then Erebus, after he's been in the Mournival for years, he knows how to tap into Horus's hubris, and he uses that to set a trap for him. And by going to Davin's moon and getting him nearly killed. And when he is shown the statues of his brother Primarchs later on, when he's taken to the Serpent Lodge, he isn't rational anymore. His pride swells to a boiling point, and just because there's no statues of him, they're not praising him. And he can't believe this. He can't believe that his father would betray him so much, yet he doesn't realize that he was the one that betrayed his father. And driving him into the arms of the Dark Gods so willingly because he believed their double hyperbole of, yes, we'll make you the master of mankind, Horus Lupercal, and you'll get your ego. His ego is just swelled by this, that he was specifically chosen by the Dark Gods, and that Erebus believes in him, and they know that he's right. And it's just like in some of those great epics of the past, like Achilles in the Iliad and Odysseus in the Odyssey, where they were tales of these hubristic men and how it's very self-destructive nature. Like Achilles, he rides into battle believing in his invulnerability, but once that invulnerability is strucken, it kills him on the spot, notably the arrow going into the heel. And Odysseus, where he always has his confidence in his abilities to get him out of danger, but he's very unable to think very far into the future, always leading him into ruin and punishing him away from the final destruction until he learns to overcome his arrogance. And it's a very telling tale of hubris. But in the end of the novel, Horus's pride leads him down a path that he couldn't turn back from, all because of pride and hubris. The novel is ultimately a tragedy, and in a massive series that focuses on tragedy, one that is expanded over the rest of the massive series of novels known as the Horus Heresy, still in development to this day, with 56 novels and counting. Final thoughts. This book is ultimately meant for a very specific audience set in the universe with already established rules and expectations of what is supposed to be inside. Despite this, I would say this novel is able to introduce a person well enough to the environment without making you lost like most science fantasies often do. For this, I give it a lot of credit to the author. A longtime writer for Games Workshop, Graham McNeil. This is the first of his works I have ever truly read, but I have read other books set in this universe. The first short story I ever read and the first story I ever read, Crusader, which was set in the 41st millennia. It's more up to date, like up in the current standing of the Imperium. But I read it and it's just like a machine gun of universal facts and lore and trivial stuff that you wouldn't really understand unless you knew the universe from before you read the book. I could say the same about the novel Hell's Reach, but that is lighter and more natural due to its novel format, and they spread out all these lore and universe stuff from getting in the way of the story. So yeah, I just give a lot of credit to Graham McNeil for writing it in enough balance that the casual just coming to read it with little prior experience could pick it up and get the plot and somewhat of the universe without prior knowledge. This particularly is because of the civilian points of views in the novel, but while the universe itself is normally very highly militaristic, you mostly see it from like a soldier or a Astartes or just some combatant's point of view. And you don't really see the civilian side of it, which gives a fresh aspect to this war-torn galaxy. And the average reader can connect to it more compared to, say, other readers, like the minority of readers that were, say, veterans or could understand that stuff, or that were just highly adept into the universe already, which goes against the classic Warhammer 40k military characters and you have a few of those in this novel. In fact, there's more than half of the characters are military characters, but for the hardcore fans that also are reading this book. It is also written in the third person limited, tends to help with newcomers. Despite my preference for first person, I still found the book fairly enjoyable. My rating for this novel, it will vary, as a plot in the first part wasn't that enticing until about halfway through part 1, but after that I was more locked into the novel as the decline Horus drew near. The writing style was okay. To me, it was nothing too special, but nothing too strenuous to read. As mentioned before, I much prefer first person. For the personal touch with characters, but I tend to view myself as more the minority in that case. So I would give this book a final rating of 8 out of 10. Great and highly recommend it, especially for someone getting into Warhammer 40k. You would possibly want to read the book read the book that came before this, but if you started on this book, you really could pick it up without having too much prior knowledge. In fact, you could probably skip the first book and still kind of get what's going on. You won't get some of the references, but you don't really need to. But yeah, that is my final thoughts on the book. Definitely check out Horus Heresy, False Gods. Really good book. If you're really getting into the Warhammer 40k, this is honestly a good place. Although there's like hundreds of books and short stories and all different areas. Like if you want to do Imperial Guard, you could probably go to Cadia Stands. If you want to see the Astartes in the more 40k time instead of the 31st millennia, then I'd highly recommend Hell's Reach. But if you want to start from the absolute bare bones beginning, like chronologically in the timeline, this would be a good place to start. So that's my final thoughts. Thank you all for joining me today. This is Darth Kilhoun, signing off.